Good evening, everyone. Time for another silver update. This is the 30-minute chart of silver provided by netdenia.com. You can click on the link below. Now you can see from this trend line here that we have established with the mild smackdown that we had today that we're going to come to a test here of this line, whether it's a correction through time or a correction through price. We'll have to wait and see. The MACD's trying to roll to the upside, but we may get that rolling over correction. If we pull out a little bit farther to the 2-hour, you can see that we're looking at a possible correction below the zero line, and we could get a big price decline. Now, if we want to look at gold, we're looking at a similar sort of chart. It's not quite as bearish as the silver chart because it's rounding down. We actually want to pull out one more and look at the 4-hour. So it's ambiguous as to whether it wants to cross over at this point. We had that big spike and then a sell-off, and so we're kind of at a turning point here. There's a lot of overhead that we need to get through. We can see that on the 8-hour. It's this area right in here and this area right in here, and that leaves us with just this small period of 2 months or so that is above us. So if we can get through that area and round up, we're overbought but not that overbought. We may get a strong rally, but they definitely capped the price today in both gold and silver, and silver is looking more bearish than gold. Now that obviously is another potential stacking opportunity. If we do turn down, we probably want to watch to see where we go. And for those of you who are late to the party, you might get another opportunity to stack. Again, we may just run up very strongly and continue this breakout that we already have. And you can see the strength of this breakout. So let's get over to a couple of questions for the night, and then we'll get to the main topic. The first one I want to deal with real briefly is from Slarty Bartfast, and this is about the breaking story that was on Zero Hedge about the tungsten bar. Now, if you remember a while back, we had a story about tungsten-filled bars, and his point that he makes on this one is that actually that's the wrong one. We want the other link here. But in the video you can see what he's pointing out is that this tungsten-filled bar, if you looked at the last one, you saw the plugs in it. This is not a plugged bar. This is actually a very seemingly professional operation, and if we watch the video,
in jewelry stores on 47th Street and
that.
5th Avenue, the important trust between merchants has been violated. This 10-ounce gold bar costing nearly $18,000 turns out to be a counterfeit, worth just about $3,600. It's filled with tungsten, which weighs nearly the same as gold, but costs just over $1 an ounce. Ibrahim Fado bought the bar from a merchant who sold him real gold before, but he heard counterfeit gold bars were going around, so he drilled into several of his gold bars worth about $100,000 and saw gray tungsten, not gold.
I really got sick, you know. It's a big amount of money, and I could not believe that somebody very professional and clever, it's perfect.
What makes it such a devious crime is apparently a real gold bar is purchased, including one with a serial number and papers. It's then hollow.
So that's a big difference between what we've seen in the past. This is a very seemingly professional operation. You can see they purchased an existing serial numbered Pamp Swiss bar, and apparently what they did was they drilled it out, and I don't even know how they did this. This is a very sophisticated operation. So this is something new, and I totally agree with the point that Slarty Bartfast is making. This is a new thing, and I've advised for a very long time that you want to stick to 1 ounce or less coins. With silver, the ability or the price profit for counterfeiting 1-ounce silver coins is so low that you would have to be looking at some kind of subsidized operation. And of course, a subsidized operation would have to be a government operation to do such a thing. But it's very curious, and it's a question that one wants to think about for a long time as to who is behind this. My guess is, if you look at how sophisticated this operation is, one would have to say that probably a government is behind this counterfeiting. So we could talk a lot longer about that, but we need to get to the next question. That's going to get to the major topic of the night. And we'll look at this. This is from Rocky, and it's a question about the silver exit plan. And the question is, Brother John F., we all know where the price of silver is going, and one day we all know that we will need to exit this market. A lot of people discuss what they will do when they exit, pay off debts, buy income generating properties, etc. If someone is 100% debt free and is looking to exit the silver market at overvalued prices when the time comes, but the person simply wants to retire, I understand that someone could sell some silver a few times in a year, in a 10-year span, but most likely there will be a very small window of time where we will be able to maximize our profit and sell our entire holdings. What would you suggest for this scenario? Is there a new currency that is backed by the precious metals? Then the choice will be simple, but what if there isn't? Thanks for all you do. So this brings me to the main topic of the night, and I really have to say that I am going to do an about face on my opinion on this, and you'll see once I cover all the information in the main topic that I have changed my opinion about this issue of paying off debts. Now, if you remember in the last couple of videos I've mentioned, and in other videos I've mentioned, especially the Office series, the fact that in a hyperinflation or even a highly inflationary environment, one is in the position that they want to have a decent or reasonable amount of debt simply because they have the ability to profit from a hyperinflation. They have the ability to pay off debts that were incurred with very expensive dollars, to pay those debts off with very, very cheap dollars. So if you're truly expecting a hyperinflation to occur, it's in your interest to carry a reasonable amount of debt, that especially if that debt was incurred by buying physical silver or gold, and then you can turn around and sell a small portion of that and pay off that debt. Now, due to the news that I'm going to cover here, I'm going to change my opinion on that and say that I don't agree with that position anymore. And it's my position now that probably one wants to look to try to seek a position of zero debt as soon as possible. And I'm going to flesh that out here real soon. But before I do that, I want to look at the news here about the latest news about the Bernie Madoff scandal. And this was just recently announced about the recovery of more assets in the Bernie Madoff situation. And this is quoting from the trustee. The distribution satisfies about half of the allowed claims filed by Madoff investors. Picard's office announced Thursday the average payment slightly more than $2 million. The trustee's office says it now has distributed a total of $3.6 billion to Madoff victims. Picard has sued hundreds of Madoff customers who took out more cash than they contributed to Madoff's scheme on the assumption they were pulling out investment profits. The trustee said he has recovered or reached settlements to recover $9.1 billion, or 53% of the estimated $17 billion in principal contributed by Madoff's victims. So you can see here in the Madoff scheme they're talking about a recovery of more than 50% of the money that Madoff swindled in this Ponzi scheme. Now, the question I want you to think about here is that if Madoff was involved in a Ponzi scheme, and you have to think about what's the definition of a Ponzi scheme. The Ponzi scheme would be paying off early investors with later investors' monies and not investing the money. That's going to be the key, is they're not investing the money. So the question would be, if this is the case, that we're going to reach actually this 50% ratio, what is the meaning of the term Ponzi scheme? And how is it possible that they were able to recover such a large percentage of the assets? And just to show you how dramatic of a difference that is, I want you to look at a chart here of Lehman Brothers. Now, this is a stock chart of Lehman through 2005 and 2008, and you can see here on this chart that the Lehman Brothers stock actually hit a price high of near 90, and you can see here a collapse to a price of 0. So this is a company that, and we'll see here that when we look at the next article here, that Lehman Brothers, this is Lehman Brothers, the rise and fall of Lehman Brothers from Dr. Housing Bubble. We'll see here that Lehman Brothers at one point was actually very right before the collapse. Lehman Brothers was actually a $47 billion company. And Lehman Brothers filed for bankruptcy, and basically the entire thing went to 0. The taxpayers bailed it out, and it's still a big mystery as to why Lehman and Bear were allowed to go bankrupt, and yet J.P. Morgan, Bank of America, Wells Fargo, Morgan Stanley, and many, many others who were in the same situation were bailed out while Lehman went bankrupt. So you can see here that the Lehman bankruptcy is the equivalent of the Madoff bankruptcy, yet we're going to see that nearly 50% of the Madoff money is going to be refunded to investors, while exactly 0% of the Lehman money is going to be refunded to investors. And yet, Bernie Madoff, as of this day, is still rotting in jail, and he is described as the perpetrator of the greatest Ponzi scheme in history, yet Lehman Brothers, which returned absolutely nothing on the investments and bankrupted to the tune of the exact same amount, nearly $50 billion. No one has gone to prison. No one has ever been prosecuted for this fraud. So I want you to think about that and how the debt situation works in this country, and you would have to say that it would be a matter of who you know. Now, before I get to that main topic, I want to read a quote to you. This is a heavily disputed quote. If you go to Snopes.com, and if you don't know, Snopes is basically a man and a woman sitting in their basement. So the amount of credibility that I attribute to Snopes.com is about 99% less than what I attribute to Wikipedia's accuracy, and that's very, very low as well. But anyway, this quote, if it's not from Thomas Jefferson, it certainly should have been from Thomas Jefferson. And I don't know the facts on this. But anyway, this is the quote. "I believe that banking institutions are more dangerous to our liberties than standing armies. If the American people ever let private banks control the issue of their currency, first by inflation, then by deflation, the banks and corporations that will grow up around the banks will deprive the people of all property until their children wake up homeless on the continent their fathers conquered. The issuing power should be taken from the banks and restored to the people to whom it properly belongs." Now, The reason I'm reading you this quote is because the import of the latest Lindsey Williams revelation, and this is about QE3. Now, a lot of people have talked about QE3. It's the Fed's announcement that they're going to print they're going to buy an endless amount of mortgage-backed securities. They're also talking about Treasury bonds. And the revelation that Lindsey Williams has made based on his insider information is that the $40 billion a month plus more that is going to be given to the banks is going to be used to purchase treasuries, so that in essence, after this is done, the banks will own the government, and on the other hand, the Fed is going to the securities the Fed is going to buy are the mortgage-backed securities. So the banks are going to end up owning the government, and the Fed is going to end up owning your house. So let's listen to Lindsey Williams on this.
Also, I'd like to advise people that these shows are archived both on AmericanFreedomRadio.com, theVinnieEastwoodshow.com, as well as guerrillamedia.co.nz. It's posted up on my Facebook, and it will also be uploaded to the YouTube channel Mr. News Guerrilla Media. So if you can't find a pencil and paper, if you wait about usually about an hour or two after the show, these archives will be up for you to go over and listen to again and again and again. So yeah, Lindsay, without further ado, let's get into the information.
The Federal Reserve announced on Thursday, 1 week ago, September the 13th, 2012, that as of then, the Federal Reserve would begin buying $40 billion, not trillion, not million, $40 billion in mortgage-backed securities and treasuries each month indefinitely. QE1 and QE2 was basically a one-time thing. This is not once. This is $40 billion every month indefinitely, September, October, November, December, January, on and on and on. Where in this world will the Federal Reserve get $40 billion monthly? And he said, you ready? Thin air. You heard me correctly.
That's real funny, Lindsay, because when you said, they're going to come up with all this money, you're like, where are they going to get it from? I said, well, aren't they just going to make it up like they normally do?
And the part that is so evil, I'm not going to even hesitate to use the word indefinitely. Let me explain what it is that the Federal Reserve is buying. They're called mortgage-backed securities. Now, let's take that phrase and turn it around, and you'll easily understand what it is. It is a security that is backed by a mortgage. May I put it in simple terms? The Federal Reserve, as of last Thursday, bought your house. If your house is mortgaged, the Federal Reserve bought it. You say, but I own it. No, you don't.
Okay, so there's the main point that Lindsey Williams is making, is that through this MBS purchasing that the Fed has announced, not only are they giving the banks enough money to buy up the treasuries, which of course the Fed has to try to not sterilize but hide their activity, which, as I point out, they've been hiding their activity through Caribbean banks. Then they began to do quantitative easing to more openly admit what they were doing. Now they're going to be buying federal debt through the banks. In other words, they're going to be printing money out of nothing, giving it to the banks, allowing the banks to buy the debt that's incurred on behalf of the American people to bail out these bankrupt banks. Then the bankrupt banks will end up owning the government of the United States, and the Federal Reserve will end up owning all of the housing in the United States. And for that reason, that's the reason why I'm announcing that I've changed my opinion about a hyperinflationary debt strategy, and it's now my opinion that it's in everyone's interest who is aware to no longer accumulate or reserve debt to be paid off in worthless dollars that will come out, but rather to pay that debt off now. And I'm going to show you why that's my opinion. Now, this is from lawyers.com, and this is a expose about debts that cannot be discharged in bankruptcy. Now, I believe that this is actually going to grow. This category of debts is going to grow. Currently, under current law, you cannot discharge under bankruptcy these types of debts: taxes and liens, student loans, alimony and child support, debts obtained through fraud, debts you failed to schedule in time to allow creditors to file proofs of claim, debts for fraud while you're acting in a fiduciary capacity, debts for willful and malicious injury, debts for fines or penalties to governmental units, debts for judgments in wrongful death, and condominium or cooperative associative fees. Now, what we're going to see as we begin to add more debts to this is that if your debt is to the government, basically it's pretty clear here: the taxes and liens are to the government, the student loans are to the government, the alimony and child support debts are to the government, the fraud judgments are about the government. So you can see here that as the government takes over more debts, and if you study law like I have, you know that suing a private party is a wholly different situation than suing a sovereign. There are all types of sovereign immunities that the government claims when you try to sue them. So because of that, because I believe that Lindsey Williams is correct, that we're going to begin to see the mortgage debt taken over by the government, it's my contention that it is no longer in your interest to attempt to pay off your debts that you have now with inflated dollars, because I think the government, who will ultimately end up owning your debts, will not accept those dollars and will do some type of inflation adjustment or whatever they want to do. And of course, that brings us to the topic of debtors' prisons. Now, this concept of debtor's prison is actually anathema to the modern Western law. But as you can see, we look at this article that it's beginning to revive. And I'll read you the history here in the United States. This is for all countries. In 1833, the United States abolished federal imprisonment for unpaid debts. And most states outlawed the practice around the same time. Before then, the use of debtors' prisons was widespread. Signatories of the Declaration of Independence, James Wilson and Robert Morris, were both later incarcerated, as were 2,000 New Yorkers annually by 1816. Henry Lee III, better known as Light Horse Harry Lee, a Revolutionary War general, former governor of Virginia and father of Robert E. Lee, was imprisoned for debt between 1808 and 1809. Sometimes imprisonment will result from less than 60 cents worth of debt. 6 states, Arkansas, Arizona, Illinois, Indiana, Minnesota, and Washington, allowed debt collectors to seek arrest warrants for debtors in default if all other collection methods have failed. Whether a debtor will actually be prosecuted or not varies from state to state, county to county, and town to town. The individual is taken into custody and is typically required to submit financial documentation to the courts to facilitate seizure of assets or wage garnishment. Although in some cases the individual may be held indefinitely until a payment plan is reached or the debt is paid in full, especially if individual is insolvent. Other states have outlawed this type of collection. Tennessee and Oklahoma have ruled it unconstitutional unless the court finds that the debtor actually possesses the means to pay, except in the case of child support obligations. Most state constitutions, including Minnesota's, have clauses dating to the 1850s that expressly prohibit the jailing of people for their debts. Some people make the claim that it is unconstitutional in the United States to incarcerate someone solely for failing to pay a debt. However, there is little settled law on this matter and plenty of precedent for de facto debtors' prisons. More than a third of the U.S. states allow borrowers to be jailed for non-payment of debts. Judges have signed off on more than 5,000 such warrants since the start of 2010 in 9 counties. Because of sloppy, incomplete, or false documentation, many borrowers facing jail time don't even know they're being sued by creditors. So there's a look at the future, people. They are now putting their debtors' prison police state into high gear. And for that reason and for the revelation that Lindsey Williams has made, I now no longer believe it's in my interest or your interest to try to use debt to accumulate physical assets, because I believe that in the future they're going to use these draconian laws. They have already turned the essence of freedom and the Constitution on its head by increasing the number of ways one can be imprisoned for debt, and it appears that they intend to go forward into a type of feudalistic system. So I have to say at this point, I cannot advise myself, and of course I don't give financial advice, but for my close family or anyone who listens to me, I certainly don't think it's in your interest to accumulate debt with the intent of paying it off with cheaper dollars, because the powers that be have made it very clear that they intend to imprison debtors, and they intend to violate the spirit of the Constitution, the Magna Carta, and pretty much everything that we have developed since the West has become modernized. And for that reason, I think that anybody who has any sense would probably want to pay off or at least pay down as much debt as they possibly can, because once the government ends up buying everything, then which they are able to buy with a printing press because they are the only legal counterfeiter around, they have the ability to print up the money to buy any debt that's out there, and then you are in debt to the government. And once you are in debt to the government, all of the rules change, and there's no more walking away or declaring bankruptcy, but you're just looking at debtor's prison. And we'll talk to you next time.